Well, it is an absolute joy to be with you all tonight. My name is Reverend Katie Sexton Wood, and I serve very proudly as executive director of the Arizona Faith Network. And we are just so excited to be offering this program in partnership with the Arizona Interfaith Power and Light and Whisper and Thunder, a program that is so special and important to us in Arizona right now. So as I said before, if you've just joined us, please go ahead and share your name and where you are in the world in the chat so we can get to know one another. Bill, I like your introduction of Crazy Chili Farm. I'm going to have to hear more about that later. But we are so very glad you are with us tonight. And I'm going to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Reverend Doug Bland, as he introduces our next speaker.
Thank you, Reverend Katie. I'm with Arizona Interfaith Power and Light. The tagline that we use is a spiritual response to the climate crisis. And we're really glad to join with other partners in putting on this important program. One of our storytellers, each time we've had a storyteller to try to spark our imaginations, because so many of the difficult issues we face are failures of the imagination. So, and we need more than just facts. We also need creativity to deal with the problems and the crises we face, and just to live life in a rich and fulfilling way. So hopefully later, Octaviana Trujillo will join us. I don't see her on at this point, but she's a wonderful Pasca Yaqui storyteller and academic. And so we'll hope she joins us so we can hear her story. Sarah King is introducing our main speaker, Sarah Ellison Porter.
Yes, thank you, Doug, and welcome to everybody. We have such a great group here tonight, and I'm excited for all the conversation that we're going to have about this very, very important topic. I've been asked to introduce Sarah Porter because we share the same first name. No. Actually, I am very proud to share a first name with Sarah Porter. She is a real mover and shaker in the world of water conservation, natural resource conservation, and we are very, very happy and lucky to have her with us tonight. She is the director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy, appointed to this position in January 2015. Prior to joining the Kyle Center, she served as the Arizona State Director of the Audubon Society, where she led the Audubon's, this cannot be right, Water Rivers, it can't be Waster, Water Rivers Project. Something.
I think that was Western.
Western, there we go. I'm going to say not Waster.
That's good though.
Thank you, Sarah. I should have read this before. Before joining the staff of Audubon in 2006, she spent 14 years as an attorney in private practice, specializing in complex commercial litigation. There is much more to be said about Sarah, and a lot of it we're going to find out as we go through the next part of our discussion with Sarah. We are using the Marshall Gantz Story of Me, Us, and Now format. So I'm going to begin a conversation with Sarah, and we'll be talking back and forth between the two of us, but I'm sure others are going to have comments or questions that you might want to put out there in the chat to get a fuller picture of Sarah Porter and what brings her here with us today. But the first part of the Marshall Gantz process is the story of me. And the questions that we ask our guests to reflect on in that focus time is, what were the events and life experiences that shaped you to have the passions and priorities that you have now? especially around water. So if you can enlighten us a little bit about that, Sarah, that would be great.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And it's a real pleasure to be with you all tonight. I didn't put in the chat, but I want to say that I am a member of St. Barnabas of the Desert Episcopal Church in Scottsdale. And I recognize many of the names in the participant group from my previous days at Audubon. And I love being back with Sarah and Doug from old conspiracies at working on projects, creation care related projects. So it's really nice to be with you all. To the question of what fuels my passions or what's the root. So I think I'd start by saying that I am very passionate about the subject of water policy. It's actually one of the most fascinating subjects I've ever encountered, especially in the West, in the Western United States. It is completely bound up in our history, in our state history, and water policy really is at the root of everything, everything about our well-being, our quality of life, our prosperity. One of the senior fellows at my organization, the Kyle Center for Water Policy at ASU's Morrison Institute, Rhett Larson, I think, who spoke with this group.
Yes, he did.
Before, Rhett published a book not so long ago called Just Add Water, where he explains that pretty much every conflict in the world has water at its, at bottom. It's a conflict over water. So that's part of the reason. It's intellectually an incredibly satisfying subject. But the real roots go back to the fact that I am a native Phoenician. My parents were Westerners from a long line, not of farmers and people who settled and worked the land and had those kinds of roots, but people who were sort of around the edge and became the school teachers and tradesmen, a lot of school teachers going back many generations. And something about that type, that people who are school teachers, is the interest in identifying and cataloging everything. And so from the time I was little, we were always saving for college in my family. And so that meant that all of our family activities turned out to be outings into mostly the desert, but the mountains of Arizona, the beach in Mexico before there was anything developed at Rocky Point. And we always had to lug up a big pile of field guides so that especially my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother could identify the plants and the birds, the tracks, the scats, everything we were encountering. And through that, really, as I reflected on the question, I thought about how I always felt that the tiniest thing was beautiful. The complexity in the tiniest thing was something that resonated with me. I love big horizons and landscapes, but I love just as much, and I could feel just as inspired by a beautiful little warbler or a tiny little composite flower, a pine cone, just contemplating the complexity of creation. And through that, I really did have a spiritual connection. Growing up in a family that didn't go to church, I developed a spiritual connection with creation that has stayed with me. So when I knew I'd be thinking about this question, I asked my mom, when do you think I became a sort of passionate environmentalist? And she said, well, do you remember when you were about 10 and we were on a hike and some people came by on horses and we had spotted a rattlesnake. It was in the Superstition Mountains. And we'd seen a rattlesnake and this couple on horseback. So we said, look, a rattlesnake, look at that. And the couple drew a gun. The woman said, get your gun, better get your gun out. And the man drew a pistol to shoot it. And I, as a little kid, strode forward and said, you have no right to kill that snake. That snake lives here and belongs here. You don't, you and your horse don't. So she said, I knew then at that point that you had a passion for protecting the environment. So I appreciate the question because it gave me a chance to think back on that. That passion, that just loving to connect with those things has always been part of the family life that my husband and I have that we, that was so important for us to share with our children. So it's just gone on and on. I guess I should also add that what kid born in Arizona growing up in Phoenix doesn't have some kind of very personal connection with water? There's whenever you go to a riparian habitat, any kind of place, wild place with water, you're struck by the differential, how much cooler, how it's buzzing and throbbing with life. There's just water is life in the arid and semi-arid West, and you can't escape that if you have your eyes open growing up here.
Very impactful. I have to say we share a lot more than first name. Thank you for especially that anecdote about the rattlesnake and your 10-year-old little self defending that rattlesnake. That is great.
And I'm happy to say
story.
they rode off. The woman said, well, you won't like it when it bites you, and they rode off. So at least that one snake lived for another day.
Yes. Okay. Success. Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Moving on from the story of me, we are going to move on to the story of us. So tell us a little bit about the kindred spirits that you turn to for your support and encouragement and inspiration, because as we all know, this is work that can be extremely, well, it's tough. It's just difficult. There are so many voices and so many demands on our water resources, and somebody like you has to balance all of those interests on a day-to-day basis. Where do you go? How do you keep at it? What keeps you going?
Well, thank you, Sarah. What keeps me going is the complexity and fascination, probably more than anything. I do have times when I feel less hopeful than others. But even in those moments, I think, well, if we don't do something, who will? Like, somebody has to try to produce information that can help lead to sustainable decisions. In a larger sense, I'm an innately skeptical person. Skepticism really runs in the family, and so I am uncomfortable jumping on the bandwagon. I'm very uncomfortable in conversations where people largely agree. And one thing, so where I go is to be around people who won't necessarily agree and will challenge my conclusions and help me think through the best way to go forward, the best thing to do. So unfortunately, maybe for the world, that a lot of people like that are lawyers. My team, my Kyle Center team has a bunch of lawyers and an economist, people like that who have training in that kind of very critical, skeptical thinking. People who think that way gravitate to that kind of training. But it really is about not being with the people who will agree and say, yes, that's right, and ain't it awful. That's the last group of people I want to be with. I want to be with the people who will tell me why I'm wrong, or tell me why their perspective is valid. And a lot, when I was at Audubon, I didn't have the chance to do what I get to do now, which is to go hear the perspective of people whose values around water are extremely different from my own. And as a professional in my job, I am not advocating for a particular, I am not an environmental advocate in this job. I was an environmental advocate at Audubon. And so it forces me to really take on board some of the ideas that when I was at Audubon, I easily rejected. There were ideas that were just anathema to me. I would hear them and cringe. And now I have to think, well, all right, this person thinks that the way to get water back in this river is to mow down all of the plants, along a 20-mile section. So what, what, why is that, that person, you know, what goes into that thinking? And that's been helpful for me. I guess at bottom, what happens is when I do that kind of thinking, I realize this person isn't you know, a monster. There's someone, it's someone who has a different set of considerations. And if I said, yeah, but I like the clapper rail, you know, I like the warblers. What about those things? We probably can have a conversation.
Okay, I also, since this is, this series is being sponsored by AZIPL, Arizona Faith Network, Whisper and Thunder. Many of our presenters have also commented on that, their spirituality as being a source of inspiration from them. You mentioned at the outset that you were from St. Barnabas of the Desert, an Episcopal congregation. Is there a connection between your faith background
Absolutely.
that you can pull into this story?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I am a good active Episcopalian. I go to church pretty regularly, and I completed training as a lay chaplain in our church, and I also am now completing the second year of a 4-year course that will be familiar to Episcopalians called EFM, Education for Ministry. Especially in my lay chaplaincy training, I had the emphasis was on listening. And at the core of Christianity for me as a Christian, is seeing the other. And that's really what I think is the most compelling responsibility for me as a Christian. How do I see the other, see the God in the other, see, you know, that's really see the divine in every other. And so when I'm at my best in any, you know, as I do my work and think about policies that I think are potentially, you know, the wrong direction, remembering that what really is fundamental for me is seeing the other, seeing the divine in the other, listening, as I've, you know, been lucky enough to have training to do. But the other thing fundamentally is, you know, I'll sometimes say, yeah, I'm a water policy think tank person, but you all know I'm an environmentalist. You all know I want rivers to flow, and you all know I want to protect habitat. There's no reason to make a secret of it. I've got a record, and that is also, you know, as I said before, that's very much rooted in my desire for people to make that same connection to the divine through the experience of the natural world. Thank
you for that. A whole nother side of you that brings you together as a speaker, brings you to us as a speaker today. Okay, and the final question, or the final point of conversation, is the story of now. Why is now such an important time to be acting on your priorities and your passions? Yeah, if you can. Sure, that's a great question. Talk about that.
When I started at the Kyle Center for Water Policy, it was established a couple months before I became the first director in the spring of 2015, and people, California at that point was rationing water. You remember all the water shaming articles there were. California was having another drought and rationing water, and there were all these headlines saying Arizona's next. And so my friends and family would say, you got into that job just at the right time. And I used to say, I should have gotten into this job 20 years ago. You know, this is not just the right time. But now, right now, this year, and more so 2022, I can say with authority is an inflection point. We're at an inflection point, especially in Arizona, as far as water goes. And we will make big decisions in the next 5 to 10 years, very big decisions, and they will have generational consequences. I can look back at decisions that were made in my lifetime. I'm old, so when I was a teenager, Arizona passed the Groundwater Management Act of 1980, imposed a cap and trade system on well water, water that's pumped up from the ground in central Arizona. That was hugely consequential, I would say, in a good way. A few years later, Arizona began importing water from the Colorado River to central Arizona through the Central Arizona Project. That is a hugely consequential decision. I remember as a teenager, there was a proposal to develop a dam on the Salt River, Orm Dam. I know there are people on this call who remember that. And as a teenager, I was very excited to protest the construction of Orm Dam with very little idea, truly, of why it was a bad idea. And now as a water policy person, I think, well, that was one good decision I made as a teenager. I didn't have the right reasons. That was a good decision. But basically, I think I am struck all the time with how we're going to make a series of decisions that have huge implications for habitat, for future generations, for how we develop as communities in Arizona. And very few people, really only a handful of people understand the scope of the decisions. And so I feel very motivated to help get more people engaged in the conversation.
Thank you. As somebody who has followed the news for decades and decades, and I'm sure all of you have, it was very rare to see an article on the front page of the newspaper about an environmental topic, let alone about water.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that throughout the last couple of years, it's very rare to not see something in the news about our water situation. The Arizona Republic has been full of articles about it. So yeah, I think we've seen that change over time. More and more people, thankfully, are starting to see this as what you said is an inflection point. It's
yeah, I'm glad that you've observed that. I think that's right. And I know that newspapers like the Arizona Republic have made this commitment, and it's risky for them to make that investment in that kind of reporting. It's good that it's visible to people. And it's also a reminder that we need to support that by subscribing to those, to our local newspapers.
Public journalism, definitely.
You bet.
Yeah.
And thank them and retweet them and all of that stuff too. Yeah.
Well, this brings to a close our Marshall Gans portion. Okay. And I know Sarah has, it's a 3-part presentation. So we're going to ask Katie to give Sarah hosting powers.
I think I have that.
You have it, and get you started on the rest of your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you
for
Sarah.
Sharing so much.
Yeah, it's very fun. I think I just have about 10 or 15 minutes, so there's not too much about water policy and this huge thing that I can say. What I can really do is maybe leave you with a few big thoughts and share a few resources with you. So the first thing, the one thing that I think we're all hearing about a lot in the news is the Colorado River. For the first time ever in the management of the Colorado River by the 7 states and Mexico and the United States Bureau of Reclamation. And that started in 1922. So for the first time ever, there is a declaration of shortage, and Central Arizona is taking the biggest hit, the lion's share of the shortage. Just today, the Kyle Center for Water Policy launched an explainer on what the shortage means. And I've put it in the chat so that you can go see this. It really explains what the impacts of shortage will be and what might be next. So I can quickly share the shortage. I'm hoping I can see that you're seeing it, right? Wait a sec. Now you're going to see it. And I can share with you, this is the explainer that I've linked. It'll take a little while. I won't belabor it, but basically it covers the basics. If you have, if you are in conversations with people who are wondering what the shortage is all about, this is a great resource for them to start with. And it's full of links to other resources to read more deeply about the implications of the shortage. And I'm really sorry for the barking. It'll pass. So that's one big thing that I wanted to first talk about, to make sure that to offer that resource. A second resource that I'd like to share with you, and I'll put a link to it in the chat in a minute, is the website where that explainer lives now, and that's called the Arizona Water Blueprint. And this is basically it's a interactive map containing a vast amount of data regarding water resources in Arizona. And you can go to the map, which is called a viewer, and click layers to find out more, to explore, to look at infrastructure, to look at impaired rivers and streams, to find out where is the critical habitat. It's just a basically extremely rich resource. If you don't feel brave enough to go use the map and explore in that way, start with the Story Maps and App Gallery, which is, I'll show you the blueprint landing page. You should have the landing page now. And so there's a Story Maps and Apps gallery that will take you through a lot of important Arizona water resources topics. So we offer this is our offering to help people learn more about water and get more engaged. And I hope you'll all, if you're not going, if you haven't been to the blueprint, I hope you'll check it out, because I think it's a super useful resource. Another big part of the blueprint, so there are really three big issues in Arizona water policy. One is the Colorado River. One is what's happening with groundwater basins in some parts of the state. We read these articles about Wilcox, having wells in southeastern Arizona and Wilcox go dry, big industrial ag moving into Mojave County. The blueprint in that Story Maps and Apps Gallery has another very useful app that you can check out, where you can go and look from basin to basin at changes in groundwater levels for intervals of 1 year, 10 years, and 20 years. You can also click up all the dots on this map are wells. So you can click up these are monitoring wells by the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and you can select a well and pull up a hydrograph of that well. You can find out what the water level changes in the basin. It's just a good resource to become more informed about what's going on in water resources in the state. So I hope you'll check those things out. And I would identify for you the things that are really our big challenges. Of course, the Colorado River is right now, it's the most urgent one. It may not, I don't think it's the biggest one, but it's the most urgent because we're looking at a big decrease, big cut in the coming year, and we're staring down at bigger cuts in years to come. And the Colorado River supplies about 40% of Arizona's water in years when we don't have a cut. Really what we're getting signals for is adapting to a drier future, a future that doesn't have all of that Colorado River water that we've been counting on. That very largely, this is a discussion about how much water will be available for agriculture in Arizona in the future. And that's a discussion that goes beyond water policy. That's a discussion that is about values that we have, about the desire to protect farming as part of the legacy of our state, about whether farming in Arizona and also in California and southern parts of California is important for food security or important for other values. So it's a complicated conversation that we're going to be forced to have, or the farming is very vulnerable. The agriculture will go away. It won't be given up so that we can have a flowing Colorado River and restored habitat that goes all the way to the Delta. It will be given up so that we can use that water for other purposes, and to a large extent for urban, for municipal and industrial uses. So important to get, to think about that. In my high level sense about the Colorado River is central Arizona, which receives without a shortage, it's used to receiving about 1.5 million acre feet of Colorado River water, is probably going to have to adapt to getting less than half of that amount annually. And that is enough to have, sorry about my dog, that is enough to have thriving cities. It's enough to even have growth in our cities. So that's the Colorado River. I have to mute and yell at my dog. So I'm just going to talk over the dog. I mentioned groundwater before, and as I mentioned, in Arizona, we enacted a cap and trade system on groundwater that has made a huge difference. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry about the dog. I'm going to have to go get her. Just a sec. This is terrible.
It's okay, Sarah. I have 3 dogs and 4 right now because we're dog seating a friend's dog. And as Sarah's dogs have been barking, my dogs have been barking back. So we all know that conversation. I was muted, Sarah. I was telling them that as your dogs were barking, my dogs are barking back. So they're having a cross dog conversation on water too.
Dogs love Zoom. So anyway, I really apologize for that. She's usually so good, but I'm not usually on Zoom this late in the evening. So she's probably just hit her limit of goodness. So the next big issue that I'd highlight for you relates to groundwater. And I'm going to show you a screen that basically about the Arizona Groundwater Management Act. In 1980, when Bruce Babbitt was the governor, and we had a legislature that we had leadership in the legislature that really understood how imperative it was for Arizona to address its groundwater issues. Arizona passed this landmark legislation, which was hailed in its day as some of the most innovative legislation ever enacted. I haven't really drilled down in the research, but I think this is one of the first cap and trade systems on resources in the United States, as far as legislation goes. The blobs, and so part of the reason that we had to enact this act is that we were growing on finite supplies of groundwater in Arizona. There was a lot of growth in Phoenix, and in Pinal County, it was mostly development of ag lands, and in Tucson, and that growth was on water that had been infiltrated underground over eons. And to the point, we were overdrafting that water. Of course, we got little precipitation in central Arizona compared with the amount that a city is able to pump out, or a big, lots of farms. So we were overdrafting groundwater to the tune of about 2.5 million acre feet per year. At this point, Arizona's water budget is below 7 million acre feet. So just imagine, that's our statewide water budget. Just imagine that we were overdrafting, such a large percentage of our water budget year after year. People understood that this was an urgent situation. So we enacted this cap and trade system on groundwater. It affects most of the population of Arizona, about 83% of the population, because most people live in these regions, in these blobs. The act requires system level stepped up conservation every 10 years. So cities, agriculture, golf courses, mines, industry have to step up their conservation every 10 years. They're held to standards. And because of this cap and trade system, there's a counting of water that's in the ground. And that means that there's a reward for leaving groundwater in the ground in the form of storage credits. So the Groundwater Management Act pushed, and there's one other thing, which is the 100-year assured water supply requirement, which has mandated that new subdivision development can't take place unless the developer can prove up 100 years of water that's physically, financially, and legally available. The Department of Water Resources actually has to issue a certificate to certify that there's a 100-year supply of water before a development can be platted. All of this combined with the introduction of imported water from the CAP really meant that there was a shift in management philosophy in these blobs. It's not so much Prescott, it has kind of special problems, but certainly in Phoenix, the other blobs, that new growth should occur on what are called renewable supplies in water management parlance. And renewable means surface water largely, or essentially not water that's being mined out of the ground, water that you can pretty well count on for next year. This has led to a great deal of security for all of us. It means that you can buy a home in Phoenix, in the Phoenix area, or in any one of these active management areas, and not worry that next year there's not going to be any water, because somebody had to prove up a 100-year supply of water before it could happen. Bigger, older cities can get that 100-year certification. It's called an assured water supply designation. They're held to even stricter standards, and most of our larger, older cities have an assured water supply designation. And it's very important to them to re-up when they do. It's about every 15 years to prove up that 100-year supply. So this is something that's been good. And I'm going to skip through a slide and get to another slide if my, yep. And so the upshot is this very interesting fact. And so much of this has to do with the introduction of the Groundwater Management Act. The upshot, and there are other reasons that we have this, but essentially what this graphic, which is from the Department of Water Resources, shows us is that water demand and growth have largely been decoupled. This graph shows population growth from the mid-1950s to 2018 in the little orange human figure. It shows water demand in the blue drop from the same period. And then the gray bars are the growth in the economy. And what you can see is that since 1980, our population has grown. We know it's grown a lot. It's grown by millions. Our water demand has gone down. We're now a little bit below the statewide water demand from the mid-50s, and our economy is almost 20 times what it was in the mid-50s. So this is super hopeful and important. When you'll see in that the Colorado River shortage explainer that I linked, we crunched the numbers for the CAP service territory, the 3-county area, and found that the population in that 3-county area in the last 20 years has grown 45%. Water demand grew 14%. Water demand could have grown 0% if there had been different management requirements. So to me, this is important because it means that the water sustainability discussion in Arizona isn't about stopping growth. It's about managing water carefully. It's about maintaining the discipline around the Groundwater Management Act, which led to this great flourishing of creativity in water management practices, from recharging aquifers with effluent in order to get long-term storage credits, to using effluent for all kinds of other uses, from clever creative exchanges of water, all kinds of opportunities that arose. So these are all sort of very hopeful signs, but it's also a call for us to defend the Groundwater Management Act and make sure that we are part of the voices of saying this has been very critical to Arizona in terms of the water security that communities need to have in our state. So I talked about that's groundwater within the active management areas. And of course, it's much bigger than I've shared, but we'll go now. I'd like to just briefly, I'm just going to skip through some slides so I can touch on, oh, here's another really important fact to leave you with. And that is that in the active management areas where people are on a municipal system, where water's being collected through the sanitary sewer system, about 93% of that water is recycled. It's collected, it's treated, and it can be reused for all kinds of, for anything, for it, even to the point of being reused for drinking water. Water that we put on the ground outside, of course, can't be collected and reused. This graphic was originally, I got it from SRP. And I kind of take issue with the fact that they talk about water as lost when it's used outside, because I think, well, there are some environmental values, that water used outside, go to. And so I don't think we would want to advocate for no use of water outside. We shouldn't say water lost, we should probably say environmental services. But this is an important reminder that there's a big opportunity to reduce outside water use that can lead to greater water resilience within communities. And that's one of the important tools that cities have for moving into this drier future where there is likely going to be less Colorado River water. So I just wanted to also get to my third big thing. And if I could talk in great detail about all kinds of subtopics here. But I think the other big thing is in rural areas outside of those active management areas that we were seeing with the Groundwater Management Act, there is almost no regulation of groundwater. There are these three little areas called irrigation non-expansion areas where there can't be new irrigated farmland, but there are three little tiny dots on the map of our state. And basically outside of the active management areas, anyone who owns a piece of land can dig a well, and they can dig it as deep as they want to. And so what this graphic shows you is that the green areas are parts of the state where the reliance on groundwater is greater than 75%. It's more than 75% of the water supply. And this is really concerning, especially in the areas that are seeing the influx of big industrial agriculture, because that big industrial agriculture comes in, develops big, deeper wells, and uses up that fossil groundwater supply a lot faster than had been previously anticipated by people who were living there. So we really are in a state of haves and have-nots in Arizona when it comes to water. People who live in the large cities within the active management areas have a high degree of assurance of water resilience. Doesn't matter how rich or poor they are, doesn't matter what ethnic group they come from, their religion. If they live in that city, they have a high degree of water resilience. People who live in rural areas outside of the active management areas and in some of the high growth areas within the active management areas have less water resilience. Now, there are, of course, many variations on this theme. You can see that there are places in Arizona like Yuma that get almost all of their water from a surface water supply, the Colorado River, and so they have a very high degree of water resilience in that particular area. So that's what I'd put out to you as the three biggest points of inflection and vulnerability in the state on for water, as far as water goes. And it all comes down to one thing, and that's political will. I look back on the Groundwater Management Act, and I think it's extraordinary that Arizona did that. It's so creative, and it took such an enormous spirit of compromise because all of the stakeholders had to give up something that they thought they could count on, and they but it was incredibly important. And my big concern is that we need to move toward political will to the political will to address the water issues that we're facing, that all of us, that every Arizonan are facing. And we won't be able to do that with partisanship and finger pointing and yelling. I'm happy. I see that a lot of questions have come in. I haven't had a chance to read them as I'm talking. Love the dog comment. So if you'd like, I can answer those, but I think I've kind of used up my time.
I wasn't sure.
There
Are
we
we
go.
ready?
There's Gretchen. I was just going to say we have built in time for Q&A, and Gretchen is going to facilitate that. So we will just turn this over to Gretchen and start working our way through some of these questions. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, we do have time built in for this. Though we now have Octavia has also joined us, which is wonderful. And I'm so glad she's been able to do that. So I think we'll be fairly short here on the question and answer time right now, so we can make some time for that as well. But let me just give a couple of questions and check in with Doug on the timing. Did you want to do Octavia before breakout rooms or after?
Yeah, I think it would be great if we could have Octaviana's story as a part of the grist for the mill for the small group discussion.
Before we go to that, can I answer the question, or I'd like to comment on the point that Octaviana brought up in the chat, that Indigenous communities and vulnerable communities may not be able to be part of the discussion. And I agree. I think it's really, that's part of the reason for trying to push information out. But I also want to make sure that there is not one Indigenous community in Arizona. Different tribes, different Indian nations are in different places when it comes to water rights. There is a great deal of diversity in terms of where such communities are. And some who have big, strong water rights are leading the Colorado River discussion, particularly the Gila River Indian community. So we need to make sure to understand that there's a great deal of nuance here.
Thank you for answering that one. We also have a question, and if you can handle these in the briefest of ways, just but something related to water pollution, specifically chemicals from
there's a
industry.
plume. I live in a neighborhood that's part of a plume. Tucson has PFAS, has from industry. They have the legacy of PFAS in their water. As far as the plume that I live on top of, someday it'll be remediated. It's not part of the water supply. It's deep underground, and we hope someday it will be remediated. There's another plume in North Phoenix that Phoenix is remediating and putting it back into the water supply. And Tucson struggles. The Tucson area, is dealing with this PFAS issue. It's actually more in downstream in Marana than in Tucson, higher up, because the water flows downhill and settles in the ground. And again, the water folks there are doing their best. But yeah, it's definitely a legacy.
And then another area to just say something towards, Tricia asks about the 100 years and how that accounting is done, and how much of that relies on the Colorado River. Are they separate? If you could.
The water that's imported to active management areas has priorities, and the highest priority water, meaning the last to be cut, is shared by Indian water rights holders, in other words, tribes who have water rights, and by cities. And when an entity tries to get its 100-year water supply designation or certificate, the likelihood of a cut is figured in, calculated in. So it's discounted if it's likely to be cut. And cities are now going for their next designation, for the re-upping, and it'll be very interesting to see how that shakes out. I expect there will be more discounting.
Thank you for addressing that. We have additional questions here, but we're also trying to balance the schedule and make room for everything. So I think at this time, I'd like to suggest that I believe Doug is our introducer, and if we could make space for Octaviana Trujillo, and then we will come back.
Great, thank you, Gretchen, and thank you, Sarah Porter. I'm pleased to be able to introduce Octaviana Trujillo. She was the very first woman to be chairwoman of the Pascayaqui tribe, and did great things while she was there. She's also an academic, so she's been a teacher and founder of the Applied Indigenous Studies at Northern Arizona University. She has done work with the Friends Committee and has done a lot of work on human rights. She was tapped by Obama to serve, it's a long title, so I want to make sure I get it right, as a member of the Joint Public Advisory Committee for the Governing Council of the Trilateral North American Commission on Environmental Cooperation. They probably have that great title because they may not have paid her much money in the process of doing that. But we're so glad to have Octaviana to tell us a story before we go to our next section.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you, Sarah. I am sorry because it was difficult to connect, and that's why I put the post, because as all of you know, in Indian country, we don't have the best connectivity to be able to have these wonderful connections to all of you and to all the work that's important to be connected to, whether you want to apply for a driver's license or Medicare. But anyway, that's a reality. And hopefully now with the new administration and monies that will go to infrastructure, maybe we'll be at a more parity level with all of you. So I will quickly say, and talk about a story. I was thinking like a story about the water. Just last weekend, we celebrated in the Yaqui village of Guadalupe, Arizona, in the Phoenix area. Some of you may know where Guadalupe is. That's where I was born and raised. We did the Cabo de Año, the death anniversary for my mother, who was ready to move on to the flower world. But my brother was rather young and he had COVID complications. So he died right before Thanksgiving. And so we had this 3-day ceremony in Guadalupe, and it's just very difficult to have a 3-day ceremony, but the village and all the religious societies are needed to do this special ceremony, and it's something that you do to complete this cycle and allow your relatives to move to the flower world. And I won't explain all the details about what Yaqui death, dying, and the flower world and the day after is, but I will talk about the water. You know, we have a feast, and we have a feast with fireworks and everything after we have the day of just having the luto the night before, saying we have been cognizant of our relatives and help them along the way to the flower world, and our penance for a whole year before they move on to the flower world. But then it's a day of celebration. So we have wonderful food, good wakawaki, chili colorado, just good chocolate, all the good food that you provide for a good feast. So all night long until dawn Sunday morning, we have the deer dancer and Pascola dancers because they are Aboriginal to who we are today. We are not all Catholic and not all Aboriginal. It's a blending of both Catholicism and Aboriginal faith and how we make sense of the world. So it's a blending of both Catholicism and our Aboriginal belief system. It's all very beautiful. And it's like, I'm an academic, right? But I'm very traditional. I was born and raised in Guadalupe. I was born at home. And so I have a sense of like what it is, who we are as Yaqui people, our identity, our faith, our religion. And to me, it's been wonderful and beautiful because I was born and raised in Guadalupe, and yet all around me is all those things that were not part of my life. Interstate I-10, this resort at Nawatuki, just west of me, the largest mall, Arizona Mills. Everything that was not part of what I knew has been part of what I know now. But what is so beautiful is that I still have those memories and the blessings of what it is to have a Paco and to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of my mom's passing and my brother's passing. So with the deer dancer and the Pascola, it's just beautiful. And there was times with the prayers and the songs, and you have fireworks. Yeah, we have fireworks. And then when it's all done, early dawn on Sunday morning, and the last blessing of the deer dancer and the Pascolas, and all the songs that were part all night long, because you have a water drum that beats to the heart of the people, a heartbeat of the Pascola and deer dancer and the deer dancer. I won't go into all of that because it's a lot more than we have in 5 minutes, right? And so when it's all done, all the blessings of the water, the sacred water that's part of the water drum. Because the water drum is part of our heartbeat as a people. It's a water holding vessel. And at the very top is a half part of a plant. And when you beat on it, it makes a really beautiful sound, a very deep sound. And that's our heartbeat. And the heartbeat of the deer dancer who carries our songs. And how we're going to take care of this earth, because we're stewards of this earth. And all the blessings of the bird world, the wilderness world. It's just so much to explain in 5 minutes, but that's all the time I was given to talk about this special blessing. And so when it's all done, sunrise on Sunday morning, we're done. We have done all the blessings, all the prayers, all the songs, the Paco, the deer dancer. We have completed our cycle. And we will continue as Indigenous people. But the sacred water that holds all these special blessings and song. They're part of this little basin where this, where that has been part of all the songs. It's now sacred. It's a blessing. And so at the very end, they really blessed the whole area. And what we know as the Christian cross today, because that whole area where they performed and where they sang the songs and all the prayers, now it's just sacred. So that's my story to all of you. And I have so many stories of why we do the things that we do to continue our cultural identity and why we need to do this and why it's the expectation of why we do what we do. Gracias, Chocotecio. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you. We wanted to make sure we had time to let this sink, let all we've heard sink in a little. And so our plan is to have some small groups. We've only given ourselves about 10 minutes. There is so much that I'm sure we have to share in that, but so we'll have fairly small groups. I think Katie's setting those up, but be attentive to making space for each person in the time that we have. And the questions, we'll put those into the chat before we move. They are, if they're of service to you as you reflect on what you've heard tonight, what's your reaction to what you've heard? What's your experience of water, your own experience of water in Arizona? Or what does your faith or spiritual practice say about water? Those are things that might help you begin to share together. But the intention is to really take the time to hear one another in these small groups. And you might choose someone or highlight things to bring back in a little bit of time together before we close. We will make some time to hear some reflections as well. So with that, I'd like to open the rooms. Go ahead and press the blue join button as it's offered to you.
Some of you will stay in this room, in the main room too. So if you did not get a blue join button, you're going to be in the main room.
And should I be joining the a breakout room then?
Yeah. And my dogs are now trying to get in on the presentation. Goodness.
Are you going to put me in a room or keep me here?
This is a room, yeah. So you'll stay in here. So
okay. Can I, Octaviana, can I ask you something, please?
you know, Satvir, that's her phone. She was having trouble connecting, so I'm not sure she's even hearing on that one.
Well, that's what happened to me. I got bumped out. My internet went down. And
Yeah.
so maybe you can tell me, is she Koskoyaki?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, I apologize, Octaviana. I tried to move her phone with her, but I don't even know if that's actually a person anymore. So
Okay.
yeah, well, good to be in such a informed group tonight with some amazing people. Gosh, Sarah, I need to go. I heard you on, I think it may have been 12 News a couple weeks ago, talking about golf courses and and I was like, oh, I want to keep listening to you. So thank you so much for your presentation. But
Sure.
I'm going to open the floor up to you all as a group to share your reactions. Please feel free to unmute yourselves.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. Thoroughly enjoyed, Sarah, your presentation for us. So important for us to increase our consciousness so that as the hard decisions that apparently are on our way, we can more fully appreciate and be a part of what is going to be necessary. One of the things I was interested in appreciating had to do with the choices that farming will have to make. And I was participating a few weeks ago in one of these sessions, and we talked a little bit about, continuing the economic farming enterprises, but in doing it in different sorts of ways, using less water, drip irrigation and different sorts of things like that. Where is that kind of discussion going on in the process, if any?
Is it okay for me to answer, or I'm happy to leave that floating.
Yeah, this is just a time for the group to,
Okay.
whatever,
Okay.
however this conversation goes. Yeah.
So, though, I think Arizona needs to embrace the idea that farming on mined groundwater isn't sustainable. And we need to move away from farming on finite resources, where it really impacts neighbors whose wells go dry. The issue, and I also want to make the point that urban farming is not necessarily more sustainable. Very often it's less sustainable than other kinds of farming, than traditional farming. So we need to be careful of the assumptions that we make. Likewise, growing food locally may not be more sustainable than bringing food in. There are many, it's complicated, but there is going to be a push for agriculture to get more efficient. And I think agriculture is going, and people in ag know this, it's very hard for a farmer to make the investment and do something really innovative. It's extremely risky. And there isn't, I don't think, enough support. So I would like to see more support more broadly instead of us, them. I would love to see more of a spirit of cooperation between cities and other groups and farmers, both tribal and non-tribal, to see how we can work together to create efficiencies and still keep farming. It's just my 2 cents. I'd love to hear what other people think about this.
Well, is the U of A doing research into this?
All of the universities are researching it, U of A and ASU, other
Because I mean,
universities.
are we still heavily dependent on agricultural as a state, as one of our main?
No, it's
No.
as far as the economy goes, it's only about, it's like a small part. of
Okay,
our
because I know
economy.
we've been shifting to high tech stuff, to tech
Yeah.
stuff.
Agriculture does use about 72% of the water in the state. So that's why
It's
it's
still
so
a heavy
important.
water user.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I want to shift the conversation to, since high tech is more people, that's what economy is moving towards in Arizona. I'm concerned. I mean, maybe is one of your presentations going to talk about uranium and other mining and the effects on native lands, or have you already done that? Or
Not tonight, but we definitely, I would love to have you back, Sarah, to talk about that, because that's another area AFN works on, is particularly around the Grand Canyon Protection Act. So that's definitely an important conversation to come back and have, but
not tonight. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm putting it out there that I'm concerned about that and military bases and their use of water too. Okay, that's my contribution.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Deacon Kim on your reaction tonight and what's going on in your head, spirit, heart.
Well, I have to say that Octaviana's story just, I felt it in my heart.
Mhm.
And it pains me to think how far away from that connection with nature that we have gotten. The thought that went through my head, just off the top of my head, was, a long time ago, God said, okay, chosen people, you're not really doing what I wanted you to do, so I'm going to choose another people. And then I thought to myself, I wonder if God's about ready to choose another people, because we certainly aren't doing the stewardship that we were supposed to do, and yet our Indigenous brothers and sisters are. So that's what just went through my head, off the cuff. But it's true. I really feel that we have dropped the ball completely, and we're trying to pick it up again, but we won't be able to do so without the help of the Indigenous peoples, because they have the heartbeat of the land in their soul, and I want that back.
Along that line, I like to say that the also what Sarah brought up about seeing the divine in the other. We all are the other to each other, and the divine is within us, and our Indigenous brothers and sisters are us as well. And so when you talked about wanting to get it back, we actually have it. In my sense, we have it. We just have to embrace each other and see that divine and not the separation, and listen to each other. I think that's the other word I heard someone say in your ministry, Sarah. You talked about the listening quality that's so important. So we need to listen to parts of the family that have information to share with us, and go from there.
Reverend Pam, you've been so quiet.
Well, just trying to absorb all of this. And, I came from water policy field myself and conservation work before I came into ministry. So it's, such a delight to listen to Sarah and kind of, get all jazzed about that part of my own experience and time that I worked for the rivers of Arizona. And then hearing Octaviana and just, I keep in my ministry, I keep looking for the hope. And so, in water in Arizona, it's, it just, Sarah highlighting the Groundwater Management Act just kind of reminded me, gave me a little boost of, yes, we can. There's always hope that people can that, wise people can come together to extend themselves into the actions that we when we get very jaded, we don't think we can do, and we have to keep looking forward and trying harder to be wise in how we manage the water here. We're called to do that. We're co-creators of creation as it moves forward from each day. So
Canon.
I was particularly concerned about the comments about large agribusiness moving in and digging those deeper wells and taking way more of the groundwater than expected or hoped for. I'd like to hear more about what is being done to halt that, especially since agriculture is not the future for Arizona. And how, is there a ground roots movement that is going into protest, bringing in these large agribusiness companies?
I can send, I'll send some information about some local grassroots efforts and forward it to Doug. And but these local little rural communities, they need support. They've had a very hard time getting their proposals have any uptake in the legislature, and the legislature has purview over groundwater management in Arizona.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We are running on time. So Gretchen, I don't know if we wanted to do any quick report outs or if we might need to move quite straight into the meditation. Is that all right with everyone? I could use some meditation. So I have down, Gretchen, that you're going to introduce our lovely leader, Reverend Pamela.
Yes, indeed. So tonight it is my joy to introduce the Reverend Canon Pam Hyde. She's of the Episcopal Diocese of Arizona, and she'll bring our time together tonight to closure. We are so blessed by the Reverend Canon Hyde's experience of the entire earth as sacred text, wherein God is revealed to all those whose hearts are open. Her sense of calling to protect God's creation became a 20-year career in river conservation. And she's worked with government agencies and nonprofit conservation organizations, and even co-founding and directing a regional river organization here in Arizona. She holds a Master's of Divinity degree from Yale Divinity School, and currently leads the Creation Care Ministry for the Episcopal Diocese of Arizona. So may we sink into a worshipful, appreciative listening as we welcome Reverend Canon Pam Hyde's sending us on toward our different ways while carrying what has touched us in our time together tonight.
Thank you, Gretchen. I'm going to reach back into my conservation days to start this with a bit of a reflection, and then we'll go into more of the spiritual side as we finish out with a short guided meditation. So back in the early 1990s, I began my work in the field of conservation by conducting a statewide rivers assessment for the state of Arizona. And so as part of that project, we developed a map of the rivers, streams, and washes of the state. So included the perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral waterways. So we color coded them. We used blue for the perennial ones that flowed all the time, green for the intermittent ones that flowed in some segments, but not in others, and red for the ephemeral washes that only flowed for hours, days, or sometimes weeks, occasionally months as a result of a rain or a snow melt. And I remember that this map was beautiful. It reminded me of a plant's root system. In fact, if you were watching Sarah Porter's background, she had a map behind her, and that it was a map of the river systems. I could tell of Arizona. But this map, especially with the colors that we had, it for some reason it reminded me of a plant's root system, where the plant reaches out into the soil to gather nutrients. And it has this myriad of delicate roots at its ends, right? It also reminded me of a diagram of the circulatory system in the human body, with the major arteries branching off into smaller and smaller blood vessels. And then finally, in the ends, to thousands, maybe millions of tiny capillaries right there at the end of the system that take that oxygen-rich blood to all the body's cells. Mm-hmm. The map of Arizona's rivers and streams painted a picture of a different kind of system, though, a hydrologic system on a landscape, where the precipitation that fell on the land gathered and combined into larger and larger water courses, finally flowing into the sea. And looking at this map and making the connection to other living systems really made me understand on a fundamental level how essential water is to a living earth. Mm-hmm. Just as plants can't survive without the flow of nutrients through their root systems, and humans can't survive without the flow of blood through their circulatory systems, ecosystems can't survive without the flow of water through their systems of rivers and streams. Water, it truly is the source of life. And so rivers and streams, and creeks, washes, arroyos, they're the lifeblood of our landscapes. This is especially true in the desert Southwest, which our river assessment map with its color coding showed quite clearly. Water is life. Where there is no water, there is no life. So I wonder what that map would look like now after decades of drought. How many of the blues would now be greens or reds? Would some of the greens or reds on that map be gone? Some intermittent and ephemeral streams no longer flowing at all? And what will Arizona's waterways look like 30 years from now? So with that reflection, now I'd like to take a few minutes to finish up with a short guided meditation. So I invite you to find a position in your chair in which you feel comfortable, relaxed, and yet alert, okay? Take a minute, find that space. And when you feel like you're set, close your eyes. Breathe in, breathe out. As you breathe in, let yourself be aware that the air you're breathing in contains a small amount of water vapor. As you breathe out, be present to the fact that the air now contains about 250 times the amount of water vapor that you breathed in. Visualize yourself as part of the cycle of the Earth's water. Now let yourself sense the inner motions within your body. Feel what's going on there. Maybe you feel the gurgling in your belly if you haven't had dinner yet, or maybe the throb of your beating heart. Maybe you sense the circulation of blood as it moves through your body. Let yourself be present to the water in your blood, in your organs, in your cells. Your blood is mostly water, and the salt water content of your blood's plasma is the same as the salt water content of the sea. It's as if within your body you are carrying rivers, streams, lakes, oceans. Let yourself savor your body's kinship with all fresh waters and with the sea. Feel within yourself the water that flows within you and within all life on earth. Our bodies connect us to all waters on the earth. The atoms that make up water, the water in us, have been and will be oceans, lakes, rivers, streams, raindrops, snowflakes, and clouds. And let yourself appreciate the life-giving force of water and the goodness of the amazing body that the Creator has given you. And feel your kinship with the whole creation. When you're ready, open your eyes. And I thank you for participating in this meditation with me.
Absolutely beautiful. We are done for the evening, dear friends. We want to please give a round of thanks for our lovely speakers. Reverend Pam, I'm ready to go to bed now. And thank you for that. Sarah Porter, as always, just full of valuable information, and love every time I've heard you. And Dr. Octaviana, same for you. I wish we had so much more time to learn more. So co-leaders with us, I know there's a lot of actions going on, but as we are preparing for the holidays, we definitely encourage you to rest and reset and stay tuned for what is next. I want to give a second to turn the microphone over to anyone who may want to lift up the Environmental Day at the legislature that's coming up, because there will be some good advocacy going on early in the spring around a lot of the things we have spoken about tonight. So Doug or Sarah or anyone else that is in that group, if you want to lift up ways to get involved in that. But in terms of this group, Sacred Waters, we will be rounding back with you in early 2022, believe it or not, on next steps, and are very grateful for our partners at the Arizona Interfaith Power and Light and Whisper and Thunder. Doug or Sarah, or anyone else that's serving on the legislature committee, do you want to say a few words about how to get involved there?
I've put my email address in there if people have questions about Environmental Day at the legislature. One of the things that's unique this year is we're darn tired of fighting bad environmental legislation, and we are promoting priorities. So we have a document that we've created that we've invited elected officials and civic leaders and organizations to sign on to. And so we'll be doing a press conference for that. Environmental Day at the legislature is February 9th. And you can sign up through the Sierra Club or write to me and I'll send you a link with that. And we'd love to have a good turnout at that event. It's an opportunity to visit with your legislators on that day as well.
And I did just drop the link for the AFN link that will get you to registration.
Thank you.
With that, another great deep thank you and gratitude, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Happy holidays, however you celebrate. Big shout out to the Episcopalians, I should say, tonight, rocking it here tonight. So many of you will pass along kudos to Bishop for it all, too. Blessings, everyone. And stay warm, Octaviana.
I will. Thank you. I need to be warm. Good night. Thank you.